Good evening. On behalf of KPCC and LAist, welcome to the Plaza del Sol Performance Hall on the campus of Cal State Northridge. Let's give it up. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name's John Cohn. I manage live programming and events for KPCC and LAist.
And I'm Ashley Alvarado. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at KPCC LAist. Thank you so much for joining us for the Season 3 Unheard LA finale. We are so happy to have you here with us. We are also excited to join you again next year for our Season 4.
By a round of applause, just so we can see who we're dealing with, is this fantastic audience. How many of you are KPCC listeners or LAist readers? So a lot of you. Fantastic. Thank you so much for consuming our multi-platform service. Yeah, somebody laughed because I think they know what's happening next. Maybe a couple of you do. By a round of applause, how many of you are members? Excellent. So you'll be surprised to find out that you're one of many venues where there's more members than listeners in the audience. So those of you who contribute to a service that you've never heard or ever listened to, you should be thanked profusely. Thank you so much for making everything we do possible. Thank you.
For those of you joining us for the first time, despite being members and listeners, Unheard LA is something that started just over 3 years ago as we sought to better understand the communities that we call home. It's an invitation to explore Los Angeles one story at a time through the eyes and experiences of our fellow Angelinos.
And one of our taglines is Real People Amplified. And that goes to the fact that some of the folks that share experiences and stories as part of Unheard LA are experienced storytellers, some professional storytellers. Some folks, they haven't done much public speaking. Some have never been on stage before or done any kind of public speaking. And that's really the ethos and the spirit of Unheard that makes us excited to be able to be a platform for folks to share their life, their experiences with you tonight.
We couldn't do Unheard LA without them, and we couldn't do Unheard LA without the generous support of the California Wellness Foundation.
Let's give it up for Cal Wellness Foundation. Thank you. Without further ado, get rid of me and Ashley. Your host for the evening, native Angelino, Bruce Lemon.
What's good, LA? Welcome to the season finale of Unheard LA. I'm Bruce Lemon. I'm your host for the evening, and it's my pleasure to be your guide as you listen to stories from your friends and neighbors from all over LA County. Now, this is the end of season 3. This is our 14th episode, and our family of storytellers, y'all, has grown to well over 120. Whew, that's a lot of stories, y'all. That's a whole lot of stories. That's so many opportunities to hear new perspectives and to see the world through different lenses. Now, I've been traveling a bit since our last show. I just came back from the Netherlands. And, oh, yeah, right? Yeah. I was on a storytelling mission, making theater in a psychiatric hospital, working with people from all over the world, people from countries I've never even heard of, all working together using the transformative power of the arts for healing. See, the magic of listening to each other and sharing our experiences, it's powerful. It's present when you tell a loved one about a hard day and you feel a little weight lifted off your shoulders. It's all around you when you tell a friend about a story that you heard here today, maybe, that reminds you of them. It's in the air. And I personally cannot think of a better way to spend my day than to live in that magic. And with that in mind, let's find out who's in the room. Is anybody sitting next to someone they do not know? Anybody? Ah, great. This is an excellent opportunity for you to meet someone new and tell them where you're from. So go ahead and acquaint yourselves. Okay, now tell me and tell everyone watching this online where you're from. On the count of 3, everybody, just go ahead and shout it out. Tell us where you're from, all right? 1, 2, 3. Yes. See, that is what Unheard LA is all about. Meeting new people, sharing new stories, sharing your own. So let's go ahead and leap into our show and give you something to remember us by until next season. Now, there's plenty of ways to remember the people we love. I'd like to think that I'd be remembered for more than just my awesome hair and dad jokes. We're here to share the lengths she went to honor her loved one. Please welcome Ellen Switkus.
So my Uncle Willie always made me laugh. He was my father's younger brother. His profession, actor. Not a glamorous movie star, but a bit player, an extra. Even though he was in more than 80 movies, it was rare for him to have a speaking role. He was known as background. His lack of fame never fazed him. About a year before he died, he wrote his own obituary. He listed his acting credits. The day after he died, I took this obituary and confidently called the Washington Post, our family's hometown newspaper. Now, I grew up with the Washington Post. I learned to read using the comics in the Post. I met my husband while working at the Post. For me, it was more than a newspaper. It was my window on the world. So it was for these reasons that it was important for me that the Post carry a full-fledged article about his death and not a mere classified death notice. I placed the call. The Post's obit editor explained that since Willie had made his adult life the focus of an obscure actor working in LA and New York, he was not Washingtonian enough for their pages. Rejection from my newspaper. I felt betrayal. Desperately, I started pleading. Oh, there must be a way for you to run his obit. Ask your boss. Put me on hold. I'll wait. When she returned, she said that the Associated Press, if they carried the obit, then the Post would carry the Associated Press obit. The Associated Press? That's the big leagues. I looked at Uncle Willie's resume. Okay, his list of credits was long, but his roles were negligible. Nevertheless, I placed the call to the AP's entertainment editor, pretty certain I was on a fool's errand. Well, wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, the AP editor immediately took my call. You're telling me Willie Switkus died? And who is Willie Switkus? I was incredulous. Sarcasm, while dealing with the death of a loved one. Editors can be so harsh. I started stuttering. Did you ever see Tootsie? Yes, many times. It was one of his favorite movies. Now, in Tootsie, Willie Switkus and Dustin Hoffman get into a legendary fight over a cab. Willie's credit was man at cab. The editor knew the scene well. Immediately he said, oh yeah, we're going to run this one for sure. Send me the obit and I'll need a photo. Before he could change his mind, I emailed everything to the Associated Press. I took a moment to thank Almighty Providence for this crazy dumb luck. I mean, what if another editor had been on the desk when I called, and what if that editor had never seen Tootsie? Within 1 hour, Uncle Willie's smiling face went out over the internet. His obit was picked up all over the world, including news sites in Uganda, Sierra Leone, Bulgaria, Huffington Post, TV Guide, and of course, the Washington Post. Everywhere, it was the same obit and the same photo. But something weird started happening. People, strangers, were commenting on his death. It began at legacy.com. Those comments were sweet but generic. Words like Rest in peace. Then the trolls came out. Their comments were not sweet, they were mean, but they were also kind of funny. For example, why is this obit in the celebrity section? Not all actors are celebrities. Then the trolls started talking to each other. Who is this guy? I don't remember him at all. You didn't see Tootsie? You don't remember Man a Cab? It was the best scene in the movie. Well, one scene does not a celebrity make. Well, many people would be understandably hurt by all this unsolicited attention. But I loved it. And I knew Uncle Willie would have loved it too. Finally, he was getting some publicity. In fact, he was getting more press and death than he ever got when he was alive. I thought of my talents as a post-mortem publicist. Maybe I could start a business getting all those unsung extras the belated fame in death that so eluded them in life. I always dreaded the day my beloved Uncle Willie would leave me in this world, but his viral cyber obit put a giant smile on my face. I mean, was all this hoopla my final gift to him or his to me? Who knows? In any case, it was our last hurrah. Uncle Willie's great humor transcended time and space. His gift for comic relief bridged this world and the next. He reminded me that the best laughs come when you least expect it.
It's not that long ago when I was on the Unheard LA stage, remembering where I was during the LA riots of '92. The memories are still so vivid to me, and they did a lot to shape the person I am today. We're here to share a moment in time that shaped him and much of LA. Please welcome KPCC and LAist own Eric Galindo.
When I was 11 years old, I remembered thinking the whole country didn't like me. I already knew no one in my neighborhood liked me. I'm a redheaded, freckle-faced Mexican-American who grew up in Southeast LA. I got beat up by gangsters for being too white, by bullies for being too Mexican, and by my older brother just for being born. But I don't think I really knew about the world outside of that, except for what I was able to see on the one-color television we had. It was in the living room, obviously, and that's where I was in the fall of 1994 when I first saw Pete Wilson's "They Keep Coming" commercial. Even now, I can feel the shaggy carpet of my childhood home clutched in my fingers as I sit on my knees, captivated by this scary ad. It showed what appeared to be an unchecked Mexican invasion in grainy black and white footage at the border, while a menacing voice says, "They keep coming." Followed by Governor Wilson talking about how he was fighting to cut off public benefits from illegal immigrants. It was an ad for his re-election that dovetailed with an ad for the Save Our State initiative, Prop 187, that blocked public services like healthcare and education from anyone who couldn't prove they were here legally. It passed by nearly 60% of the vote, but was ruled unconstitutional. 25 years later, almost to the day, I got a new job. This, basically. Well, not this, but I'm on the radio reporting for KPCC. And for my very first assignment, I was giving this big Prop 187 retrospective project. As part of it, my editor, Leslie Bernstein Rojas, asked me to tell my Prop 187 story. Everyone has a Prop 187 story, she says. She grew up in LA too. You can tell because that's a very LA thing to say. So I grabbed a mic and a recorder and some tamales de elote, Mexican power bars, and I ran out into the great big city. Well, I didn't run, I drove. And I found that Prop 187 story was actually our Prop 187 story. I talked to so many people who in large part credit their success today to losing battles they fought to stop Prop 187 in the fall of 1994. Like Irene Sanchez, who said, thanks to Prop 187, she became a teacher. I talked to Angela Fajardo, who said her Nicaraguan father was inspired by Prop 187 to finally become a US citizen so he could vote. My buddy Memo Torres, who was just 13 back then, says Prop 187 woke up his whole family to the importance of being politically active. Now he takes his kids to protest. I also talked to Angel Cervantes, who helped organize a massive anti-Prop 187 rally in downtown LA 25 years ago. As I'm driving to his place in San Fernando, I'm remembering how on the day of the big student walkout, I tried walking out, but I was caught by the principal and sent to detention. I talked to Angel in his kitchen, the war room of most Latino households. I asked him, why Prop 187 and the "they keep coming," which he initially saw as an attack on him and his family, now seems to hold a warm place in his heart. Very few of those kids who we were organizing were over 18, but they changed the world, he says. My first ever job was at the Paramount Swami. It's a 73-year-old Mexican-style flea market in Southeast LA that's open every day of the year. I was too young to be working, really, but I made $10 a day at the swap meet, taking food orders on the weekends. During the 187 battle, I remember the swap meet being kind of dead for the first time. People were scared, my mom says, of those days. But my parents don't remember being worried about sending me there, because in my mom's words, te ves güero. I look white, she tells me. Prop 187 was the first time I had to ask my parents if they had green cards, if I had a green card, if we were American. They did, and I was born here. And damn right we're American. I can still hear my father screaming in heavily accented Spanglish, "Mira, Eric, don't start con esas tonteras." I heard Pop say it again recently when I asked him and my mom, now U.S. citizens who only vote for Democrats, if they remember Pete Wilson. My mother clutched her chest and sighed, "Ay, los niños," like I had just invoked La Llorona, the mythical woman who drowned her children and wanders the earth, terrifyingly crying for them. For the 25th anniversary of Prop 187's passage, I returned to the Paramount Swami to find it was still thriving. On Tuesdays, they have specials that bring so many customers, it fills several large parking lots on Paramount Boulevard. On the weekends, they have live music and pack the place out like a food festival. It basically is. The 73-year-old Swami is also a reminder that we weren't coming, we've been here.
I love trying new foods. You could say I have a taste for adventure. Just last week, I had fried grasshopper. What? Well, not all new experiences are that crunchy, all right? Here to share her own culinary journey, please welcome Damona Hoffman.
At 9 years old, my grandparents' freezer both intrigued and frightened me. I still remember the rush of cold, the wave of scents that would overcome you when you opened it. It was filled to the brim, old tofuti tubs stacked on top of cottage cheese containers of a bygone era. Sometimes you would open it, and a 1984 brisket would practically leap into your hands, almost begging to be taken out of its misery. I cringed every time Grandma went to the freezer because I never knew what ancient item would be unearthed. But there was one dish that I feared most. It was horrifying. It was terrifying. It was Grandma's pea soup. That day is still crystal clear in my mind. The day she brought out the vat of pea soup. Grandma B was a Depression-era daughter of immigrants. She worked her way through school and hustled her way through life. She rocked reusable grocery bags before it was cool and would send me to 3 different stores clutching a handful of coupons just to save 95 cents. She would wear clothes until they were long out of fashion and then offer them to me since she was getting too thin to wear them anyway. She thought I might just be thick enough to still fit into the bell-bottoms that once hugged her athletic PE teacher body, but now hung slack on her 4'9" frame. At the time, I took offense to her goodwill, but I now know she meant it as a compliment. It was a sign that my family did well, and I ate well. To be scrawny and underfed was an embarrassment, and she still couldn't shake the criticism that was whispered through the alleyways on the south side of Chicago or in the old country when someone didn't have enough and looked like it. If I had understood this as a child, then the Pea Soup Incident, as I now refer to it, may never have happened. "Why don't you try some pea soup?" Grandma innocently asked. "I don't like pea soup," I spit back. Actually, I had never tried pea soup, but I took one look at the vapor billowing off of the vat, and I knew I didn't want it. "Just try it," she replied. Rolling my eyes, I shot back, "Why should I try it if I know I won't like it? How about I make a little bowl for you and you can see?" "No, thanks." B was not one to take no for an answer, so she just began to chop some pea soup off of the block and into a bowl. "Just 2 bites, and if you don't like it, you don't need to eat it." It was a standoff. Our eyes locked, each more determined than the other to stand her ground. But I knew that if I declined pea soup today, it would just be back for me tomorrow. There was no escaping B's will. If she wants you to have pea soup, you will have it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but you will have it. I relented. As the bowl ceaselessly circled around the microwave, I watched that block melt and soften and then begin to bubble up like the emotions raging inside me. I sat over that bowl for what seemed like hours. Just 2 bites and she'll go away, I thought, as I scrunched up my face and choked it down. "Well, what do you think?" she calmly asked. I was raging inside, and here she was, cool as a cucumber, cool as that foul freezer. "I hate it," which wasn't true. I was just so busy firing daggers at her with my eyes that I hadn't had time to actually taste it. "Just 1 more bite," she insisted. I took a breath and swallowed down 1 more spoonful. Then I quickly thrust the bowl away. See, I hate it. I told you I would." Grandma just calmly removed the bowl and brought it back to the kitchen. "Well, at least you tried it," she shouted over the counter. That's when I realized that this wasn't about pea soup at all. This was a matter of survival. If you don't eat your pea soup, you don't steel yourself against the pressures of the world, you won't make it. Her parents had been through so much to make it, escaping pogroms in Russia, coming to America without knowing English, sending their youngest daughter to college. Whatever it took, the Cadkins were going to make it. And I'm reminded of their struggle every day when I see my 9-year-old daughter. This girl classifies herself as a half-vegetarian, which means she won't eat anything other than Annie's macaroni, cheeseburgers, and a very particular kind of Quaker instant oatmeal. She has the privilege to be picky. But if she rejects pea soup, what will the consequence be? No one will whisper. No one will bully her. No one will die. She could never understand the sacrifices that those before her made to give her the option to reject food. I don't have the words to explain it to her, so I honor my grandmother's legacy the only way I know how. By scooting her burger aside to make room for a few spoonfuls of peas, calmly setting the plate in front of her and saying, just 2 bites.
My father once told me that every bad idea I have, he already had. Proving time and time again that we inherit more than just a likeness, recipes, and traditions from family. We're here to share what was passed down to him. Please welcome Richard Tom.
"15-year-old me shouldn't have been there in the first place, but there I was. My feet were firmly planted on the bottom of the pool, and one hand was gripping the edge in chest-deep water. It was a hot day at my friend John's house, and I was convinced it would all turn out just fine. The it was that John was climbing to sit on my shoulders, and we were about to start a chicken fight. What my friends didn't understand, although I'd tried to veto the chicken fight idea from the start, was that I was essentially a pool virgin. This was one of the first times I'd ever been in a pool, and importantly, like my mother and 4 siblings, I'd never learned to swim. Seconds later, the fight started, and almost as quickly, it was over. John fell forward into the water, and I found that I drifted into the deep end, in over my head. In a slow-motion panic, I tried to get to the pool's edge, realizing that yelling did no good because that just made me swallow more water. For a split second, I thought I might drown. I don't know how, but fortunately, just as quickly, I got out. I'm certain that I assured my friends that I was fine, but I didn't go back in the pool, and I didn't do another chicken fight. In fact, from then on, I avoided pools and beach parties, and if I did go, I stayed on the sidelines. As it turns out, I came to learn that my mother, now 88, had experienced a similar trauma. She recalls how, when she was only 3 or 4 and lived in China, she loved to play in the village pond. One time, when she was left alone, she unknowingly wandered too deep into the pond, so far that her mother had to rush out to save her. Also unknown to her, since I've never told her about what happened to me, because after all, there are those things you don't tell your parents, she and I are connected by that common experience. Knowing what happened to her, I understood why my mother had chosen as she had. Her way of protecting herself and her children was to avoid the water, and that included not taking us to swim lessons. However, her choice had a cost. While I managed without swimming, the anxiety, embarrassment, and shame were always there, just beneath the surface. By the time I was in my early 30s, I was married, and we had children on the way. Knowing that they'd face many pools and swim parties here in Southern California, as I had, and knowing the social handicap that my fear created, I was determined that I'd be able to take them into the water and get them swimming. I tried lessons from the teenage co-ed who usually taught children at the local Y. Not good for my ego. My spouse's efforts to teach me to float were stymied by the death grip I had on her arm the entire time. Definitely not good for our marriage. Enter Paul Lennon and his adult aquaphobic school at the Glendale YMCA. While Paul had been a competitive swimmer, he suffered from anxiety and panic attacks. That probably explained his empathy for aquaphobics like me. Paul understood that telling me to put my face in the water and blow bubbles, like they do with children, wouldn't work for me. Neither would telling me to just get over my trauma. He understood that the key to overcoming my fear was addressing my anxiety over the loss of control that comes with the weightlessness of water. Essentially, my fear of fear. He addressed it by thinking through all of the worries that an aquaphobic could have. Worried that the water's too cold? Paul had it at a balmy 95 degrees, almost like a bath. Worried that you might panic in the water and need to grab onto something? Paul custom-made a floating frame out of PVC pipe and foam for just that purpose. Paul held his classes late at night with classical music as the background soundtrack. He kept his students in constant motion, slowly and methodically practicing simple movements like gliding, turning over, and floating, over and over again, often past midnight, until the alien water became familiar. So, for 6 months, I went to class every week. I got to where the repetition made being in the water normal. That allowed me to come to terms with the water. Not to be a triathlete, or even close, but enough for me to be comfortable in the deep end of a pool without fear, and to get my 2 children to swimming themselves. In doing that, we broke the chains of fear that might otherwise have passed, almost like a genetic trait, through multiple generations.
So as soon as we set this show in Northridge, I immediately looked up all the places I needed to eat. I know, food, again. No insects, though. But that is certainly not all that the neighborhood formerly known as North LA has to offer. So, here to give you more than just my diet and a new understanding of the places we call home, please welcome to the stage our favorite and only intern, Danny Rosales.
I have a confession to make. Although I'm here to talk about Northridge, I'm not from here. In fact, I'm not even from Los Angeles. I came here for the first time 3 months ago, and while I'm not an Angelino, I have learned a thing or two about this place. I'm constantly surprised by the diversity, complexity, and the richness of Southern California's history. As I was digging into the history of Northridge, I realized this is true for Northridge too. Many peoples have called this region their home, and throughout the years, the region has changed a lot to become what it is today. The territory began as Native American land. 2,000 years ago, the San Fernando Valley was home to the Tongva and the Tataviam people. Then the Spanish missionaries claimed it in 1769. After the land became part of Mexico's territory, it was sold to ranchers and investors. Francis Marion Bud Wright was among the buyers, and in 1910, he named his part of the city Zelza, or Oasis, which stayed with the city until it became part of Los Angeles in 1915. It was then when Zelza became North Los Angeles. But because people confused North Hollywood and Los Angeles, the name was changed to Northridge in 1938. Since those days, Northridge has become a diverse community. And although many associate it with the earthquake of 1994, there is so much more to this place. Northridge has been home to the Devonshire Downs music shows and the impressive orange groves. It's home to Brent's Deli and, of course, California State University Northridge, where we are today. This campus has been a part of the Northridge community since before the school was officially founded. In 1952, when a new branch of the Los Angeles State College was going to be built in Baldwin Hills, the community leaders advocated for this campus to be built in the valley. In the end, they won. And in 1958, what would later be called CSUN was founded. A year later, the school made history as the first state college in California to have its very own computer. It had a memory of 4,096 words. Can you imagine? For its first 14 years, the campus was known as the San Fernando Valley State College and only had 2,500 students, but the foundation was the same. The school mascot was still the matador, its colors were the same red, white, and black they are today, and tuition was $57.50 per semester, so you know, not much has changed.
In the mid-90s, I was navigating the politics of middle school and running for class president. I had to figure out who I was, and I always thought of myself as a man of the people, so I landed on an identity wrapped around a bold campaign promise of cafeteria nachos every Friday. Oh, I think I got your vote. Here to share who he is and how he found out, please welcome Frank Mundo.
When I was 11 years old, I became a Mexican. I didn't plan on it or anything. It just kind of happened. I went to bed one night, and when I woke up, I was a Mexican. Back then, I was a lot of things, so another title didn't surprise me. I was a son and a brother. I was an artist and a comic book writer. I loved riding bikes, collecting baseball cards, and I was a huge NFL fan. I was also one of the best athletes in my school, and in my mind, one of the best basketball players in the world. I didn't know what a Mexican was just yet, but I was going to be the best at that too. It happened so fast. It was during recess on a new basketball court at a new school in a new state, and it was go time, baby. Time to show these California fools how it's done, son. Maryland style. I was about to introduce myself, to put on a show they'd never forget. I was about to take these chumps to school. In Maryland, we shot free throws to decide team captains, a fair and democratic process. In California, there was a far more efficient system. A variation of shirts and skins, they called it whites versus Mexicans. And it was pretty simple. Everyone with white skin was on one team, and everyone with brown skin was on the other. I was impressed. Recess was pretty short, and I wanted as much time as possible to show them what a wizard I was on the basketball court. And that didn't take very long. Shoot for ball, one of the white kids challenged me with a wicked bounce pass, but I short-hopped it like a pro, bounced the ball back between my legs, and our ball, I declared, before even shooting it, a promise soundly fulfilled with the metallic echo of the chain net, like money in the bank. Cha-ching. I walked back to the Mexican side with swagger, clearly the team's new captain. Let's do this, I said, and the game began. Now, obviously, the Mexicans prevailed. I don't remember all the details, but I remember playing better than I even imagined. Just 2 hours before that, I had stood awkwardly in front of my new classroom as our teacher introduced me to these same students. Nervous and uncomfortable, I tried to avoid their stares and their judgments. But now, all of the boys in my class were thoroughly interested in what I had to say. I made friends fast with these boys, real friends, good friends, my friends for the last 30 years. Over the years, we probably played hundreds of games of whites versus Mexicans basketball. My hoop skills, however, didn't translate as well with the girls that day, especially the Mexican girls, when it was quickly revealed that my Spanish wasn't very good. A language they were convinced, in those beautiful almond-shaped eyes, should have been my language too. I don't blame them, really. They must have been just as confused about me as I was when we first moved to California, especially about my race. It might sound weird, but the subject simply didn't come up until we moved here. Sure, I was brown and my last name was Mundo, but all I knew for sure was that Mundo meant world in Spanish, and that Spanish was some language people spoke in Spain. Sometimes people ask me if I was adopted, but I always told them what my mother always told me. I was brown and dark-haired like my father, and my brother was white and blonde-haired like my mother. My father went to prison, and I lived with my mother who didn't speak Spanish. That usually ended any more conversations about adoption. I didn't know it at the time, but this one game of basketball would become a defining moment in my life and of my friendships with many of these boys. Because over the years, we not only became great friends, but we realized the mistakes we had made that day about each other and the colors of our skin, and we fixed them. We changed. We grew up and we saw each other through our own eyes, with our own perceptions and on our own terms. And we're still great friends because we're more than just the color of our skin. I'm more. I'm a son, a brother, a husband, and a father now, too. I even married one of those Mexican girls with the beautiful almond-shaped eyes. I'm a poet and a short story writer. I love traveling, collecting first edition books, and I'm still a huge NFL fan. But most importantly, if my friends and I get together for a game of whites versus Mexicans basketball, I'm a Mexican and a white. The team captain, in fact, and my team always wins.
The morning rush can be hectic, so I try to balance out my day by taking it easy with coffee or tea at home before stepping out into the world. I mean, anything can happen out there. Okay, maybe I'm a little neurotic, but here to confirm my anxiety, please welcome Jessica Lee Williamson.
I was at the Astro Burger in Hollywood on the corner of Melrose and Gower. I was standing at the counter and had just finished ordering my breakfast when I noticed an older man lying on the floor right below the "Pick Up Your Food Here" sign. He was moaning and sweating and complaining of chest pains. A cook who had come around the counter was squatting down next to him and dabbing his forehead with a dish rag, but it was an indifferent sort of dabbing. Like sometimes he'd hit the man's nose or miss his face completely. Because instead of watching what he was doing, the cook was watching a Today Show segment about breastfeeding on the giant flat screen television. When I asked the cashier if the man was okay, she just shrugged her shoulders and, in an afterthought, asked me if I wanted regular iced tea or if I wanted to try their new passion fruit infused flavor instead. Her nonchalant approach made me question my public display of concern, which set off a very deep internal debate. On one hand, somebody was already tending to the man, and my concern wasn't going to help him. So maybe the polite thing to do would be to mind my own business. But it seemed callous to act oblivious to someone who could be on the brink of death. I thought of that news story where a woman died in her office cubicle and nobody noticed until days later. I worried that if things turned out for the worst, they showed the Astro Burger surveillance video on the 5 o'clock news. And I'd be the person who was busy counting out exact change while a man lay dying 3 feet away. Then she asked me again and motioned to the long line of people behind me. Do you want regular iced tea or passion fruit? I figured I'd see what the other people in the restaurant were doing and that I would go along with whatever they had decided was the socially acceptable thing to do. People were texting and carrying on casual conversations. The song "Midnight Train to Georgia" was playing in the background. A man was toe tapping and singing along while he admired the rice pudding in the dessert case. So I looked at the cashier and said, I guess I'll try the new passion fruit. Once I got my order number, I stuck with the business as usual plan that everyone had silently agreed upon, and I sat where I always sit, which happened to be just 2 tables down from the indisposed elephant in the room. On the other side of the pickup window, a girl was calling out people's order numbers to let them know their food was ready. Without skipping a beat, people got up from their seat, stepped around the man on the floor, and picked up their tray. I watched one woman go through the entire process, only to turn around and do it all over again for an extra side of hot sauce. I'd say that was the point where I started regretting my decision to go along with the group in the first place. But I had already paid for my food, and I had already drawn attention to myself by holding up the line. I decided I would wait it out and told myself that if he was still there when my number was called, I would draw a line in the sand, or in this case, on the cold tile floor, and I would refuse to pick up my tray. In the meantime, I stayed focused on the television screen while silently judging the apathy that surrounded me. I only broke my stare to close my eyes and pray for a miracle to happen, preferably before they called my order number. And my prayers were answered, or at least someone's 911 call was answered, because 3 paramedics came rushing in and began attending to the man on the floor. They picked him up and put him on a stretcher, but they didn't rush him away. Instead, they removed his shirt right there and began hooking him up to a portable EKG machine. And then that was when it happened. The girl behind the counter called out my number. I stuck to my guns and stayed in my seat, but she called it again and again, louder and louder each time. I found myself in another internal debate. maybe someone shouting the same number over and over again was more stressful than someone quietly and cautiously sneaking by to pick up their food. I couldn't be sure if the man was actually saying anything because his oxygen mask was all fogged up, but as I watched him stare out at us with a soft, subdued focus, there was something in the man's eyes that called out to me as if to say, "For the love of God, number 74. Just come over here and pick up your food." So I crossed the line I had drawn for myself, and I made my way to the counter. I did say, "Pardon me." And I did ask a paramedic if the man was going to be okay. He said he would probably be all right. I still ate my breakfast in complete self-disgust. Because it's really difficult not to feel like a terrible person after you've squeezed by someone who could be having a heart attack to pick up something as trivial as a tray of food. But even more than that, when the tray of food that you're picking up consists of an order of French toast and 2 sides of bacon, it's also really difficult not to see the irony in the situation. I suddenly found myself worrying more about my own health than about the health of the bare-chested man who was being wheeled past me on a stretcher. And it's that moment in particular, that makes you realize you kind of are a jerk, just like everybody else.
Growing up, I had modest dreams, like traveling the world, living on Mars, and becoming a Ghostbuster. Now that I've achieved at least 2 of these things, I'm in hot pursuit of something new. Here to share her dreams, please welcome to the stage, Danielle Ewbank.
It has been my lifelong dream to paint all the oceans on the planet. I've always loved drawing and painting. I love the challenge of it. It's really hard to get things to look the way you want. When I get it right, I'm elated. I feel like I could fly. As a kid, I'd spend all my time drawing, but I didn't paint water. In fact, I was terrified of painting water. I grew up in Northern California, and I have a specific memory of sitting on the beach with my mom and dad staring at the Pacific Ocean and thinking to myself, look at all the shapes in the water. How gorgeous. I'll never be able to draw that. The shapes were incomprehensible. I couldn't figure out what the water was doing. As an adult, I became a professional artist, but painting water was still something I stayed away from. It was too hard. In 2001, I found myself on a beach in southern Spain. After several days of painting the dunes with my back to the Atlantic, I started to get bored, and I turned around. This time, I wasn't going to let my fear of painting water conquer me. I think that's why I decided to paint it. There wasn't anything extraordinary in the view that day. It was the pure challenge of doing something really difficult. I couldn't stand the idea of letting it beat me. My first painting that included water was only 8 by 11 inches, and I titled it Dunes, too. It only has tiny little triangle of water in it. I was still traveling in Spain in a fishing village where I spent every day for the next 2 months sitting on the dock painting water. With each painting, I observed the water closer and closer until my paintings were focused on the ripples, eddies, and intimate shapes formed on the surface of the water in the marina. I was hooked. I only wanted to paint water from that point on. 2 years later, I received a call from an art collector friend who asked the ominous question, "What are you doing for the next 6 months?" He introduced me to an explorer who was putting together his first international sailing expedition. Philip Beale didn't know that he needed an expedition artist until my friend convinced him he needed a specific artist who paints water. He said, "It isn't an expedition unless you have an expedition artist. Look at Captain Cook. He had William Hodges." My friend convinced him to visit my studio, and when he saw my walls filled with paintings of different kinds of water, he instantly got it. I was expedition artist aboard the Borobudur ship, a replica 8th century Indonesian wooden boat that sailed from Indonesia across the Indian Ocean, around the Cape of Good Hope to Ghana. Built in the style of an 8th century boat, there was no refrigeration, no running water, no bathrooms. In fact, there were no rooms, period. I loved it. Along the way, I painted the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. I returned to LA after this expedition, where I painted the Pacific in Santa Monica and Long Beach. It was a quiet accomplishment. There weren't any parties or fireworks, but for me, it was monumental. It took 25 years, but felt like I was able to continue that conversation that I had started with the Pacific when I was a kid. Philip Beale invited me to be expedition artist on his next expedition, the Phoenician Ship Expedition, a replica 6th century BCE Phoenician boat that circumnavigated Africa. For this journey, I was able to paint the Mediterranean Sea and Indian Ocean. Things were going great. My husband and I bought a small house in Los Angeles and had a beautiful daughter. Then, when our daughter was 3 years old, I found out I had cancer. I was utterly certain I was going to die and abandon our little girl. I needed hope and something to take my mind off. I needed something big to drive towards. I decided to sail and paint all the oceans. I applied for all kinds of opportunities and dreamed of sailing the Arctic. Amazingly, I was accepted on an artist residency where artists and scientific thinkers are thrown together on a sailing vessel in the high Arctic to talk about climate change. I dived into painting the Arctic, which gave me hope. That left only one more ocean, the Southern Ocean. I'm happy to report that I have just returned from Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. It took a year of planning and a huge crowdfunding campaign in order to get there. My studio is filled with paintings leaning against the walls, water painted in turquoises, blues, blacks, and violets, and a couple of canvases with the occasional penguin. I couldn't resist. I have now achieved my lifelong dream to paint all the oceans on the planet. I did it. And I'm happy to say I'm now cancer-free. The oceans are so vast that when I stare out at the horizon, I lose visual perspective. They are so much bigger than my petty fears about drawing water or even my own health, which are small and inconsequential from that perspective.
Keeping up with the gym routine is hard. Somewhere between deciding to go and actually going, I just find something else to do. But then I learned how to surf. And it's everything. It's exercise, endorphins, and a whole lot of fun. So here to tell you how he added some excitement to his routine, please welcome Stuart Jacobson.
I go to the gym around the same time almost every day. I spend all of my time on the elliptical. It's very efficient. Working out this way is also very black and white. The harder you work out, the greater the benefit, the higher the endorphin rush. There are no shortcuts. You can't cheat the system. Sometimes my wife joins me. Not in the elliptical, that's too intimate. She schedules a spin class. My gym shares a parking lot with a nearby office building, and while it costs $30 to park there, my gym will validate your parking so it costs only $2. Now I feel like king of the gym, or rather, king of my aging group, the Silver Sneakers. I exercise, I scan my parking stub for validation, I get a beep from the scanner, and in what I think is a kingly manner, I strut out high on endorphins. Then one day, I put my card into the machine at the garage exit, and it says that I owe $30. I use the intercom button to call the office. Meanwhile, cars are beginning to line up behind me. I reach the sadist at the other end of the dusty, encrusted box and plead my case. He tells me to go back to the gym and validate correctly. I tell him that I already did this. He says something about trying it again, but I can't really hear him because now the cars are honking. Neither I nor this voice can hear each other. It's hopeless. I pay the $30. I drive home despondent. I never cheat the system, and now the system is cheating me. The next day, after the elliptical, I run my stub through the bar scanner to validate, 2 times to be safe. Beep, beep. And for good measure, a third beep. I go to the exit, I put the ticket into the machine, and the little screen says $0.00. The gate opens. Dazed, I drive home. Next day, I try a test. 3 bar scans, beep, beep, beep. Then the gate says 0. This is a loophole, a flaw in the system. I exercise, I scan my stub 3 times, I strut out with the added endorphin rush. I'm not only king of the gym, I'm also king of the garage. My empire is expanding. Now, I knew that this was wrong, but I couldn't just let it go. So I made an ethical deal with myself. I do the triple beep only 14 times, so I'd recoup the $28 that was out after the system failed me. On day 15, 1 beep, fair and square, but I couldn't take my eyes off the machine. It is just so tempting, bordering on the unresistible. I'm already here, and who would know, or much less, who would even care? So beep, and then beep. Not only am I developing a taste for this, I'm getting addicted. And this rush is the biggest rush ever. I'm on the career path towards full-fledged outlaw. After too many ungrounded years, I get in touch with my true self, a cross between an edgy gangster and a crusader for justice for the little guy. Move over Butch Cassidy, Bonnie and Clyde, and Billy the Kid, and make way for Stuart Jacobson, PhD. I brag about this to my wife. She just rolls her eyes. I continue enjoying this cheapest of thrills for several months till one day I drop my wife off before parking. At the garage entrance, a uniformed attendant is blocking the gate. He tells me that the ticket dispenser is broken and I'll have to pay in person at the office. I go do my workout. I start obsessing about what the uniform guy said. The dispenser is broken. I have to pay at the office. They got to be on to me. So instead of endorphins, neurotic anxiety kicks in. I finish my workout and wait for my wife to get out of her spin class. I tell her that the garage has found out about my scam and now I'm going to go to prison. She has 0 sympathy for me. You could have stopped when you made yourself whole with the $28, but no, you had to see yourself as a big-time criminal. So I do what I do best, beg. She agrees to go to the garage office to pay the $2 in cash, no credit cards, no paper trail. She pays the fees, comes out and tells me that they have 4 large video monitors, each with 16 screens. Now I know for certain that they're onto me. We head back to the car and I make her drive, hoping that the facial recognition software that they probably don't have won't recognize her face. I make her use an exit we never use. When we get to the gate, I am in such a state of panic, and I think, I'm such an idiot. Is $2 a day really worth this stress? I'm not the king of anything. I will soon be incarcerated, making wine in a toilet, and communicating with my wife through a glass wall. I was actually thinking seriously about how I'm going to cope with this stuff. How the hell did I get myself into the place where it became reasonable to consider this? I realized how messed up I had become. And it was all because I tried to cheat the system to stick it to the man. And I, Stuart Jacobson, PhD, did more than okay by living in the system. I unbuckle my seatbelt and curl up under the glove compartment. Okay. I bargain with God, in whom I don't know if I really believe. If you let me go this time, I will never do it again. We get out with no problem. Now I am proudly upright and do a sitting strut. The elliptical still gives me a great rush, and being an outlaw, it gives me a better rush. But the biggest rush of all is beating the system. I'm excited and serene at the same time. The next day and every day since, beep, beep, beep. I might as well be king of the world, and I've got $2 in my wallet.
Northridge might not look like the Wild Wild West, but this place has more ties to America's greatest cowboys than I ever knew. But our next storyteller, she knew. Here to share, please welcome Julie Ann Ream.
The San Fernando Valley began as the suburbs of Hollywood, a place where actors both worked their trade and raised their families. During the 20s and 30s, it gave birth to the Western. These movies, serials, and TV shows were largely filmed in the Valley, the landscape rich with the character of the Old West. Two of the most popular locations were the Iverson Movie Ranch, located in Chatsworth, California, and Republic Pictures, which you would know today as CBS Studio Center in Studio City. A studio that has never closed its doors and has been active since the 20s. The Westerns saved the movie industry during the Depression. At a time when big, lavish productions were too costly to film, a Western could be cranked out within days and were wildly popular. The Hollywood Cowboys are the pioneers of the Western serials, TV shows, and films that were made in the San Fernando Valley. I'm proud of those pioneers, and my story today is written around three of my favorites, my family. Three cousins who spent their lives both in front of the microphone and behind the camera, making their living as Hollywood cowboys. They all three began their lives as actual real-life cowboys, sons of ranchers. After leaving his parents' ranch at the tender age of 16 to make his fortune in the 20s, my grandfather, Taylor Cactus Mac McPeters, became a shining star. He began his career in rodeo and quickly rose through the ranks, finding fame and popularity as a singer, songwriter, stuntman, and actor. Cactus ultimately appeared in over 300 films and television shows, including most of John Wayne's B Westerns. He is credited with bringing Western music to the San Fernando Valley and performed at LA clubs such as the Riverside Rancho and the Palomino Club. He was a rodeo performer and announcer for the Hoot Gibson Rodeo and wrote an award-winning #1 hit for Ernest Tubb. He and his many Western bands performed in the early Westerns, and he became a sidekick to both Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. It was his band, Cactus Mac and his O-Bar O Cowboys, that was to later become the Sons of the Pioneers when he left it to his youngest band member, Leonard Sly, who later became Roy Rogers. Cactus was also a narrator for Disney cartoons in the 40s and 50s, many of which you can still find today. He had a little ranch in North Hollywood, right behind the Palomino Club, where actors and stuntmen would hang out after auditioning at Republic and wait for the call to see if they had won their roles. His career in the industry spanned from the 30s to the 60s, when he died suddenly and unexpectedly on a movie set at Universal Studios, making The Ugly American with Marlon Brando, the direct result of an injury sustained during making an episode of Gunsmoke. Cactus's first cousins were Glenn Strange and Rex Allen. Rex voiced many of the cartoons and shorts for Walt Disney in the 60s and was the voice of the Carousel of Progress ride at Disneyland. He appeared in many films and television shows, and though Cactus was 21 years older than Rex, he acted as his stunt double when Rex was in front of the camera. Glenn Strange and Cactus were born 1 week apart to sisters and were as close as two people could be. Glenn was also a stuntman, a boxer, and a deputy sheriff before becoming an actor. He was a wonderful fiddle player and was a member of many of Cactus's musical groups. He was also quite a prolific songwriter, penning the scores for many of the westerns with his writing partner, actor Eddie Dean. Glenn made a wonderful villain, best known for his roles as the Lone Ranger's nemesis, Butch Cavendish, and as Sam the bartender in Gunsmoke. He was also Universal's Frankenstein monster. His 6', 6.5" frame, hulking demeanor, and rough and ruddy looks winning the role when Boris Karloff became weary of the extensive time spent in makeup. At this point in Boris's life, it took 4.5 years to become the 4.5 hours. We were joking about that backstage, and I actually did it. It took 4.5 hours. If I say it, I'll tell them the story. I'm going to mess it up. It took 4.5 hours to become the monster, but it only took Glenn 45 minutes. When Universal's makeup man Jack Pierce finished the job and asked Glenn what he thought, Glenn replied, "Oh my gosh, you've turned me into Boris Karloff." Glenn passed away in 1973 and is buried at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills. Appropriate, I think, as it's the original location of Universal Studios. The three cousins went down in movie-making history when Cactus and Glenn appeared in Westward Ho! With John Wayne, the first Western ever put out by Republic Pictures, and Rex Allen made the last Western they produced. The family opened and closed the gates of Republic, and because of that distinction, I was honored to be asked to moderate a second-generation panel when they celebrated their 75th anniversary. I hope to work in the preservation of history for many years to come, and am currently working on a book on the lives of my family. I hope you'll come and visit us at Valley Relics Museum, where I work as a docent and a curator, and you can actually see the famed Iverson Movie Ranch sign that hangs prominently over the exhibit of the careers of my family and the rest of the Hollywood cowboys.
Okay, everybody, we are down to our last storyteller of Unheard LA Season 3. And prepare yourself for a treat because he's a familiar face around here and a member of the extended Unheard LA team. Here to take us home, please welcome one of my favorite humans, Mr. Brian Kett.
I love my neighborhood grocery store, but it has the worst parking lot in North America. It's like no matter what you do, you're always driving the wrong way. And to help with this, the managers hired a parking lot attendant named Avi. And Avi is a very nice man. He always wore these gigantic sunglasses. And a few years ago, I went grocery shopping when it was over 100 degrees outside, and Avi was there in the parking lot, and he was directing traffic and sweating profusely and really just looking miserable. And I decided that I wanted to do something nice. So when I was in the store, I bought him a bottle of water for like 50 cents. And when I gave it to him, he was so happy and thankful. And I drove home that day really impressed with how amazing I was. And the next time I went shopping, Avi remembered me. And even though it wasn't nearly as hot out, he asked me for another bottle of water. And I was a little taken aback, but I said, yeah, one water coming up. And that was a mistake. Because from then on, every time I went shopping, Avi would ask me for a water, and I didn't want to say no and make things weird, so I would buy Avi the water. And eventually, I just accepted the fact that I was now the water guy. And this went on for a few months until one day I was walking in to do my shopping, and Avi reached out, he touched my arm, he said, no more water. And I thought, great, I'm done. But then he finished his sentence, and he said, instead, carrot juice. And this was an issue, okay, because the juices were fortified with like antioxidants or whatever. They cost like $5 a bottle. The man was taking advantage of my generosity, and I was really upset, which is also why I was really confused when I heard myself say, yeah, one carrot juice coming up. And so I bought him his stupid juice, and he thanked me. But as I drove home that day, I vowed that while I had made peace with being the water guy, there was no way I was going to let myself become the juice guy. Wasn't happening. And friends would say, Brian, why don't you just, buy your groceries somewhere else? And it's like, how is that fair? He's the one being ridiculous. Why should I change? So instead, I did the mature thing, and I began trying to avoid Avi. I started shopping early in the morning and late at night, and it was really inconvenient for me, but it didn't make any difference because he was always there. And he would always ask me for a juice, and I would always feel obligated to buy him the juice. And every time I put that juice in my cart, it felt like I was giving up a piece of my dignity. And this went on every single week for 2 years. I know. Until one day I sat down and I calculated that being the juice guy had cost me about $500, and I was livid. Like, not just with Avi, but with myself. For letting things go on this long. It was time to do something about it. And so the next time I went shopping, it was hot out. Like really hot out. Like burn yourself on the seatbelt buckle of your car, kind of hot out. And Avi was in the lot, he was drenched in sweat, and I walked past him, and as I did, he opened his mouth to ask me for a juice, but I cut him off. I didn't even let him speak. And I had this thing prepared in my head, and I turned to him, I said, hot one today, huh? Which is not that cool. And I walked into the store, and when I pushed my cart past that juice section, I felt alive. This surge of triumph ran through me, but that victory was really short-lived because as I shopped, every person in that store reminded me of Avi, and I kept trying to ignore it. It's like every other customer was drinking a bottle of water. I told myself, oh, no, that's not because it's unbearably hot outside. It's because they probably just exercised. And even though we were in an air-conditioned building, all the employees were sweating through their aprons. I told myself, oh, that's just because that fabric isn't very breathable. But when I rounded the corner and saw all these parents and their kids camped out in the frozen foods aisle, just trying to cool off, all I could think about was Avi out there in the sun, sweating behind his gigantic sunglasses, and my heart broke a little because this wasn't about me. It had never been. This was about Avi. The guy worked tirelessly. He was always there. And he worked in the worst parking lot in North America. And I was about to take away a small bit of comfort that he had. And in that moment, I knew not what I had to do, but what I truly wanted to do. And when I put that juice in my cart, it didn't feel like I was giving up a piece of my dignity. It felt like I was gaining it back. Because I wasn't acting out of obligation anymore. I was making a distinct choice. And that felt good. And when I gave Avi that juice, he was so happy, and that felt great. And since then, I have bought Avi many more juices. And I know that when I go grocery shopping next weekend, Avi's going to be there. And Avi's going to ask me for a juice. And I am going to be more than happy to buy Avi that juice. Because I stand before all of you here tonight, proud to say that I am the juice guy.
And that's our show. Well, show us some love by texting Unheard LA to 626-314-6135. Thank you to all the folks that make Unheard LA possible. Thank you to our growing Unheard LA family right here. Give it up for them again one more time. Thank you to the folks here at the Plaza del Sol Performance Hall. and the California Wellness Foundation for their amazing support of this project from the very beginning. A very special thank you to all of our KPCC and LAS members that were in the house today. You make everything we do possible. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Share it with us at kpcc.org/unheardla, and while you're there, make sure you sign up for our Unheard LA newsletter. That's the best way to find out about all of our upcoming shows, salons, and other fun stuff. So once again, thank you for coming. Before you leave, be sure to grab one of these printed programs on your way out, and stick around for the mixer, which starts right now, right out front, where I encourage you to meet someone new, introduce yourself, and tell them where you're from. And remember, whatever you do, don't leave here tonight with your story unheard. Bless you. Good night.